This episode is brought to you by Amazon Prime. There's nothing sweeter than baking cookies during the holidays. With Prime, I get all my ingredients delivered right to my door, fast and free, no last-minute store trips needed. And of course, I blast my favorite holiday playlist on Amazon Music. It's the ultimate soundtrack for creating unforgettable memories. From streaming to shopping, it's on Prime. Visit Amazon.com/Prime to get more out of whatever you're into.
This episode is brought to you by GE Healthcare. GE Healthcare sees possibilities through innovation. They are partnering with their customers to fulfill healthcare's greatest potential through groundbreaking medical technology, intelligent devices, and care solutions, just like they have for over 125 years. The technology they're mastering today will help make care more personalized tomorrow. Find out more at gehealthcare.com.
On the night of May 6, 2024, at 5:20 p.m., the police in Seoul, South Korea were dispatched to a department store rooftop following the report of a man standing on the ledge of the 15-story high-rise. The caller suggested that they believed the man was going to take his own life. When officers arrived, they found 24-year-old Choi Jae-won standing on the rooftop ledge. Unlike the panicked or distraught person they expected, Jae-won stood eerily calm and cooperative. As officers tried to engage him in conversation, he stepped back off the ledge without resistance and without words. He just allowed himself to be escorted down to the ground floor and into the back of the police car. During the next hour, the officers tried to understand why Jae-won might have tried to take his own life. Was it academic pressure, financial issues, mental illness? At first, he just remained quiet and refused to answer any of their questions. Then he suddenly made a request. He wanted to make a phone call to his parents. The police agreed to let him call his family. He told them that he had not taken his medications, which were still in his backpack atop the department store's roof. He needed to take them every day. One of the officers agreed to go retrieve the bag. But when they returned to the rooftop, what they found would transform the situation into something far more sinister. Lying in the shadows of the rooftop's corner, partially concealed, was the lifeless body of a woman. Her skin was pale, and her body was covered in her own blood. Next to her was Jae-won's backpack, just as he described. Welcome to Korean True Crime, with me, your host, Mimi Mizuko. Thank you to my patrons for making this show possible. If you would like to support my show, you can find us on Patreon. Following the show wherever you listen also helps me a lot. I appreciate feedback and reviews as well. Lastly, join us on Discord for the occasional movie nights of films based off of the real crimes. Links are in the description. Warning: today's episode contains dating violence. Listener discretion is advised. Although the criminal's name has been revealed by the public, his name has not been released by the police. The victim's family has spoken to the press and asked that his name be kept anonymous to prevent any secondary victimization to either family. We will respect their wishes by using a pseudonym for the perpetrator and the victim. In 2018, Choi Jae-won became a celebrity for his academic achievements. At just 18 years old, he achieved a perfect score on the College Scholastic Ability Test, or the CSAT, a feat that is so rare, it's likened to winning an Olympic gold medal. In fact, you're more likely to win an Olympic gold medal than get a perfect score on this test. Out of nearly 600,000 high schoolers to take this graduation test that year, only 15 others achieved a perfect score. Choi was one of them. Coming from Hwasong, Gyeonggi-do, Jaewon was celebrated not just because of his intellect, but also because of his humility. During interviews, he was downplaying his achievement, stating that he only got a perfect score because he had to study so much harder than everyone else. That wasn't a brag. He stated that he wasn't as smart as his peers, so he had to work harder to achieve what they had. His study routine was insane. Rewriting his lessons into personalized workbooks, choosing not to own a smartphone since elementary school to avoid distraction, and spending almost all of his waking hours studying. In a culture that demands academic excellence, Choi Jaewon was the example of success. His parents were envied by everyone. Hwasong decided to honor him by putting up banners of his face around town, and various news stations started to interview him. As well, he started receiving scholarships, and his parents became symbols of effective parenting. On top of all of this, he just seemed like a perfect person if you were to read the articles about him. He was a man who wanted to become a surgeon, inspired by his mother who was a nurse, and from a personal experience he had with a skilled doctor during his high school years. Jaewon had suffered from ear infections practically his entire childhood, and no doctor he saw could actually fix the problem. They just kept prescribing him medication after medication, but it never truly stopped the infections from coming back. He suffered for 17 years with chronic ear infections before he visited a new clinic that had opened in Hwasong. This doctor thoroughly examined him. He was gentle and listened to him talk about his symptoms before finding the root cause of the reoccurring infections. This doctor was able to do what none of the others had. He was able to put an end to the ear infections, and trust me, as someone who has chronic pain, that relief feels like you're beginning a brand new life. He knew in that moment what kind of doctor he wanted to be. He wanted to be the kind of doctor who truly listened to his patients and worked hard to help them improve their quality of life. He wanted to make lasting changes in his patients' lives, which I'm sure most doctors initially do, but the doctors who saw him for the first 17 years of his life had let him down. But behind all of the academic achievements and the demureness of his smile, there was a darkness inside of him, festering. In 2019, he was accepted into Yonsei University's medical school. This is the country's best medical school. He would have been accepted into any school he applied to, however, because of his achievement with the CSAT. This would be a point of bragging for any school, so he was a status symbol, essentially. Despite this, going from high school to medical school was incredibly difficult. Jaewon had been diagnosed with general anxiety disorder and obsessive compulsive disorder while in high school, which made changes in his routine and unexpected events especially upsetting. His parents knew that he felt incredibly frustrated when things didn't go according to his plan, which can affect a lot of people who have difficulties with feeling helpless or going out of their comfort zone. Jaewon had a life plan to counteract this. He kept to his plan. He was going to go to medical school, graduate, open his own clinic, and become the doctor that his patients would thank profusely for changing their lives. I want to state now that having OCD, anxiety, or difficulties with change does not make a person violent, aggressive, or mean. His mental illness is not going to be the reason that we blame his actions on. In the words of Marcus Parks, who heard it from someone else, mental illness is not your fault, but it is your responsibility. And Jaewon would allow his control issues to manifest into a monster. Before medical school, Jaewon seemed, for a lack of a better word, ordinary. Despite his boy genius reputation and his perfect CSAT score, there were no glaring signs that he would struggle with the transition to higher education. But medical school was a huge turning point, a place where the cracks in his carefully constructed persona would begin to show. Chaewon had dedicated himself entirely to achieving that perfect score. Years of single-minded studying focused him on excelling in just that test, designed to measure rote memorization and standardized problem-solving skills. This test doesn't really prove if someone is intelligent, creative, or good at problem-solving. In fact, there are many people who get perfect scores on the English language portion who couldn't have a conversation with you. But excelling in this exam didn't mean he was naturally gifted at learning or adapting to new things. Medical school is an entirely different beast than high school. The demands of learning complex, unfamiliar concepts from scratch was incredibly overwhelming for him, as well as the fact that studying medicine and the human body is something that requires a lot of creativity as well, because no two bodies are perfectly alike. You have to be able to problem solve with some creativity. And while many students struggle in their first year of college, Chaewon's academic weaknesses were becoming too much for him to overcome by sheer memorization and studying. Yet, Chaewon still wanted to uphold his cool, relaxed appearances. To his classmates, he appeared calm and composed. He never was showing signs of stress or frustration. They thought he was a really good student. Yet when others tried to get close to him, he avoided friendships. He even limited interactions to just small talk. It wasn't until he began withdrawing altogether, even avoiding small talk, keeping his distance from others, that people began to notice something was wrong. The catalyst for his biggest change came in 2020, following his first year in medical school. Chaewon had failed so many courses that he was forced to retake that entire year. This failure struck a huge blow to his ego and self-esteem. As a student funded by academic scholarships, he was under a lot of pressure to maintain high grades to keep his financial support. The risk of losing everything he had worked for was just hanging over his head. And his family wasn't wealthy. He needed those scholarships. To his peers, though, Chaewon was not a troublemaker or an outlier. He was simply one of many students who couldn't keep up with the intense demands of medical school. Over the last decade, there has been an increase in dropout rates among medical students. This isn't necessarily due to the difficulty of the coursework, but rather the horrible conditions awaiting resident doctors. Some 100-hour work weeks, 36-hour shifts at a time, and the sink-or-swim mentality of veteran doctors. Without good working conditions, you're not getting the best doctors. You're getting those who can endure with little sleep. This means the best doctors are those who can just get patients in and out as fast as possible, rather than give quality care. Less than 5% of fourth-year medical students are registering for the medical licensing exam in Korea, and attendance rates for classes have plummeted as students protest the system's unsustainable expectations. To this day, attendance rates are abysmal, with most doctors choosing to go abroad instead. If you have a child in Korea, you likely know how difficult it is to even find a pediatrician who isn't booked into the next year. And keep in mind, Korea's birth rate is one of the lowest in the world, so pediatricians should have openings. But they're all leaving. This likely won't affect medical tourism, but it will affect people waiting for necessary treatments and surgeries. Students all over the nation have been protesting this complex issue. Chaewon, however, was not a part of these protests. He wasn't fighting for systemic change. He was just simply trying to survive. But his survival tactics were flawed. He attended his classes, but he didn't complete assignments. He showed up, but he didn't meet the course's expectations. The blow of being held back his first year was something he never recovered from. and it threw his entire life plan off schedule. As his peers were moving on, graduating, beginning their careers, he was stuck, both academically and emotionally. By the time Jaewon was floundering while his classmates graduated, the consequences had already begun to snowball. His scholarships were on the verge of being revoked. This threatened his ability to even attend college because he couldn't afford it without those scholarships. At one point, he even worked as the ambassador for Mega Study and filmed a series of interviews for them where he gave study advice to high school students. He was a huge role model for these kids who had dreams of going to prestigious schools as well. But after this incident, Mega Study quickly dropped him from their program and started deleting any mention of him from their website. I don't blame them. How could anyone have known what kind of person Choi Jaewon would become? Earlier this year, 2024, in February, he reached out to a middle school sweetheart of his, whom we can refer to by the pseudonym Hyoju. Hyoju was also 24 years old and was also in college. However, her personal details are more private for both respect of the victim's family's wishes and because they were never revealed by the police. Hyoju and Jaewon had dated briefly in middle school and often went on dates around department stores, which my husband and I also loved because it's a great weekend outing. You don't even need to go shopping because many of the stores just have really fun displays, events, or art exhibits. Specifically, they liked going to the Ara Tower and Seocho Seoul. However, their childhood romance fizzled out as they went to different high schools and lost contact soon after. But Jaewon never forgot her. This sounds romantic, but truly it was because he always kept tabs on her for when the time came that he needed to get married. He had known that Hyoju's family was wealthy, and her father would be likely to invest in his clinic after he graduated medical school. If they got married, he would kind of be expected to invest in it. Hyoju had always been a part of his life plan, unbeknownst to her. When he reached out to reconnect with her, she just thought it was a sweet gesture. She agreed to go on a date, and they started to rekindle their puppy love. She was more than happy to meet with him again. But his behavior in their relationship was calculated, and his intentions were to manipulate and brainwash her so that she would fit like a puzzle piece in his plan. And at this point in her life, she had way too much independence for his liking. So his plan was clear: make it so she cannot leave. They dated for about 2 months, all while mostly communicating through phone calls and text. She told him that she already had plans to study abroad from before they even reconnected, and that she would be leaving for a semester in America in July of 2024. This wouldn't do. He began to convince her that they needed one another, and that they couldn't be apart. He told her he needed her here for support of his graduation from medical school, which it's likely that she never knew how many classes he was failing, and that he wasn't going to pass the medical licensing exam. He just needed to rush to keep her with him. This is when he started allowing his controlling, narcissistic behavior to overtake him. He didn't treat Hyoju like a partner, or even a friend, but a pawn in his plan. His plan was to commit what is called reproductive coercion. This is a situation in which a person forces their partner to become pregnant or become a parent against their will. It takes bodily autonomy away from the pregnant person, especially if they live somewhere without access to abortion services. Jaewon wasn't at the stage yet to begin messing with her birth control, but he thought he could manipulate her into believing that this was her idea. He began to try to convince her that she wanted a child more than anything, more than her education, that she should marry him and start having children immediately before going to America. When she brought up her travels, he would get angry and lash out at her, never physically, but using emotional and verbal abuse. Their relationship, or the situation Hyoju found herself in, was fraught with control and manipulation. Hyoju's father described her as a young woman with a bright personality and big dreams. She had always been a very independent woman. She was in the middle of applying for scholarships for her travels and really wanted to achieve her dreams on her own. In April, 2 months into their messy relationship, Chaewon took Hyoju to the district court office and forcibly filed a marriage certificate. We can't know how Hyoju truly felt about this because not only was she beginning to be brainwashed by Chaewon, but she also began to detach from those around her. She wouldn't even tell her parents about the marriage until days later, and this likely is because he had filed the paperwork without her consent. He was trapping her in their relationship, and as far as anyone else knew, she was helpless. This marriage meant she would lose the opportunity for most of her scholarships. Her financial aid situation would change as well, leading to her losing most of it. And effectively, this ruined her plans to study abroad. The forced marriage jeopardized her entire future. Chaewon didn't care because he was only thinking about his life plan, not caring that he had just ruined hers. According to Hyoju's family, he was gaslighting her into believing she would only have a good, successful life if she stayed with him, had a baby, and built their lives together. He just wanted her parents' wealth, which would be crucial to funding the opening of his clinic. He never truly cared about her. But Hyoju's family and Jaewon's parents began to try to convince the couple to file for annulment of the marriage. Jaewon and Hyoju's parents kept in contact, and in the end, Jaewon's mother gave him an ultimatum, stating that she would kick him out of their home if he didn't annul the marriage. And she was serious. She changed all the door codes on their house. She felt like she had to intervene harshly. She told him if he ever came back home, that she would file the annulment lawsuit on his behalf. After being given this ultimatum, Hyoju and Chaewon decided to try to commit suicide, but thankfully, they survived. When Hyoju was recovering, she agreed with her parents that she would end the relationship and come back home to them. For context, they had been married less than a few weeks at this point. They'd been together for just 3 months. That is just how toxic Chaewon was. He was so manipulative. He had taken a woman that was known for her independence and brainwashed her into an almost Stockholm situation in just 3 months' time. The most shocking part of this case was that the couple had only met in person less than 10 times at this point. Almost all of the relationship was through texts and phone calls. He had isolated her from everyone around her in just that little of time. Now, we don't know what vulnerabilities Hyoju had that might have played a part in this, but it took a truly deceitful and evil person to manipulate someone that quickly. After Hyoju's parents were able to get through to her, and she agreed to end the relationship, she contacted Chaewon and told him she was going to file to annul their marriage, and that she wanted to break up. This was incredibly risky on her part, because according to what she had told her parents, he had already threatened to kill himself and kill her multiple times to get what he wanted. When she tried to stand her ground about going to America to study abroad, he threatened to kill himself if she spoke to other men, and then started to threaten to kill her if she went. Once, he'd even threatened to stab her to death if she disobeyed him. Despite reaching out to break off the relationship, she was still really upset. She still believed that she loved him and had a lot of difficulty making this decision. She had made this call early May 2024. A few days later, she receives a call from Jaewon on May 6th. No one knows what he told her on the phone, but the police believe it's likely he was threatening to kill himself again to manipulate her. He needed a good enough reason to convince her to meet up with him. She agreed to meet him on the rooftop of Ara Tower, where their first date in middle school was. When she left the house, her parents asked where she was going, and she just said she'd be back soon. She didn't look like she was in distress or like she thought she was in danger, but you never really know what someone's thinking inside. As she traveled to the department store, Jaewon was walking through a grocery store on the street of Ara Tower. He had brought his backpack, filled with a change of clothes, and at the store he only needed to purchase one item, a knife. It was 3 p.m. when he left the store, purchased the knife, and placed it in his bag. Then he started to walk towards the tower. He had around an hour and a half before she would arrive. He made his way to the rooftop and waited. It is believed that Hyunju arrived closer to 4:30, but there's no CCTV or any witnesses who saw her. No one knows what is said between the two, but it's likely that a fight occurred. Jaewon would tell the police that he tried to convince her to return to him and that his life would be back on track, everything would be fine again, but she refused. Jaewon had anticipated her refusal and had a contingency plan. He pulled the knife from his bag and stabbed her in the carotid artery located in the side of her neck 20 times without hesitation. He wiped the knife off on his pants and then dragged her body in the corner of the roof. He changed his clothes into the clean clothes he'd brought and stood on the rooftop ledge of the 15-story building. He leaned over the edge looking down. Pedestrians down below saw him, looking like he was going to step off the ledge, and they called the police at 5:20 p.m. 2 minutes later, the officers arrived and came to the rooftop doors. They convinced Jaewon to step off the ledge and come downstairs. They couldn't see the body hidden around the corner. And because Jaewon had changed his clothes, they didn't see any blood. When the officers brought him down to the first floor and then into their car, they thought they just rescued a suicidal man. After an hour of questioning him, why would you try to take your life? He asked to call his parents and said that he'd forgotten his bag on the rooftop. In his bag was a medication he needed for his OCD and anxiety. The officer returned to the department store, but when he searched for the bag, he found Hyoju's body instead. She had bled out from her injuries. He radioed the police station and an emergency arrest was made. Jaewon again was cooperative with the police, but they were in shock. He had remained silent the entire time they tried to ask him about his motive, but now they had an answer for why he was trying to kill himself. He decided to come clean about what had happened and plainly said, "I committed the crime because she told me we were breaking up." He murdered Hyoju just 20 days after forcibly filing their marriage certificate. Just 3.5 months after reaching out to her and reconnecting. His only reasoning was that he couldn't handle his life plan being thrown askew, so he lashed out and resorted to murdering the person he believed was ruining his plans. This case was so insane it received public attention immediately. The media and police did not reveal his identity due to privacy laws, but the public started sharing his information readily because he was a minor celebrity in Hwasong. I would use his real name. However, due to the victim's family asking for his real name not to be used, we will not. However, typically murderers don't deserve any level of privacy or respect. Jaewon's mother, of course, has received a lot of harassment, unduly. She was once a woman who was praised for raising the boy genius and being an example of exemplary parenting. But now, she was the woman who made a monster. She apologized and asked for forgiveness from the public, stating that she wishes she never tried to end their relationship so abruptly, that she didn't kick him out of their home so abruptly, which caused Jaewon incredible stress. She told everyone that she believes it was because of her that he snapped. Of course, we know it's not that simple. People who knew him in school, grade school to college, would say he was like an overfilled balloon, ready to pop. He was never able to adjust to the demands of college, and he always had struggled with change. A person posted to an online forum identifying themselves as his sister, although their identity was never confirmed, and said that he always was this way. He always was violent and mean when he didn't get his way. He often lashed out to people who went against his plans, or when his plans changed. He just hid this part of himself from the public because his plan was to appear like he was that selfless, caring doctor who had treated him. The public saw right through him now. His first trial was set in August 2024, and with Chaewon admitting guilt to the crime, the trial had only one decision to make. What sentence is appropriate? The prosecution has demanded the death penalty and a life in prison in the meantime, considering no one has been put to death in Korea in a very long time. Criminal profiler Bae Sang-hoon has analyzed the case and offered an assessment. He said, "This is a case where someone with an excessive sense of elitism couldn't stand being abandoned, and his anger turned violent. For Jaewon, losing Hyoju wasn't the end of a relationship. It was the collapse of his carefully curated image of control. His academic failures, his faltering reputation, and the unraveling of his relationship was way too much for him to bear." Profiler Bae Sang-hoon also noted that Jaewon exhibited a strong sense of pride in his academic achievements. He frequently shared photos on social media showcasing his accomplishments, including his university acceptance letter, and images constantly on campus. When he went on trips, he would wear his school uniform just to emphasize his identity as a top-tier student. Bae suggested that Jaewon's excessive sense of elitism played a crucial role in the crime. He essentially was unable to handle the self-humiliation that he felt when his plans went awry, ultimately erupting into violence. Professor Lee Soo-jung, a criminal psychologist on the case, took this analysis a little bit further. He stated, "The feeling that he is inferior to his friends may have triggered some personality traits in him. He was trying to fulfill his perverse need for control over his girlfriend. It makes you wonder if he actually has any psychopathic tendencies." Both of the experts were pointing to the same motive. He had a need for control. For years, he kept his emotions and insecurities hidden from everyone, presenting this facade of brilliance and perfect composure. But behind closed doors, his behavior told a different story. Hyoju was a huge part of his plan, and when he faced losing her, he snapped. By the evening of May 8th, just 2 days after the murder, Jaewon was officially detained as a flight risk. On May 9th, his psychological evaluation began, starting with the meeting of a criminal profiler. 2 additional profilers were brought onto the case, trying to figure out his motive. In cases like this, it's standard for a team of 4 or more profilers to conduct a comprehensive assessment. This process includes interviewing them, conducting personality tests, and analyzing behavioral patterns to identify their criminal tendency. One critical test for this is the Psychopathy Checklist Revised, also known as the PCLR. It's a diagnostic test used to measure psychopathic traits. We've talked about this test before, so I won't get into too much detail about how it's conducted. The PCLR evaluates personality traits such as the lack of empathy, impulsivity, irresponsibility, and emotional coldness. The test consists of 20 questions, each scored on a scale that adds up to 40 points. In South Korea, a score of 25 or higher will classify you as having psychopathic traits. Psychopathy is not diagnosable, but the traits are present in mental illness such as antisocial personality disorder. For comparison, some of Korea's most infamous criminals, Kang Ho-seun, Cho Do-seun, and Lee Eun-hae, scored between 27 and 31 points. Even the perpetrator of last year's Shillom Station attack was known for having psychopathic traits above 25 points. On May 9th, 2 profilers from the Seoul Metropolitan Police Agency's Science Investigation Unit interviewed Jaewon for 3 hours. They were focusing on his psychological state and what state of mind he was in when he committed the crime. However, the psychopathy test was not conducted that day. A police spokesperson explained, "It's not that Tae Jaewon refused, but rather that many procedural steps, including data analysis, are still pending. The test itself, which does require the subject's consent, typically takes about 10 days for the results to process. Speculation began. Would Jaewon again receive a perfect score? During his interrogation, Jaewon admitted, "I didn't plan the crime for a very long time, but it's true that I planned it. It wasn't a random crime." This was what led the public to begin calling him a psychopath. On May 20th, the results of Jaewon's PCLR test were revealed. He scored a 10.5, which is well below the psychopathy threshold. Officially, he is classified as not having psychopathic traits. However, this doesn't mean he has a clean bill of mental health. Experts concluded that Jaewon had a high risk of committing future violent crimes. The evaluation found he indeed was suffering from obsessive-compulsive disorder and generalized anxiety disorder. Both were conditions he was already taking medication for. Jaewon's mother later stated that his medication was increased so much during his time in police custody that he was barely able to complete a sentence. Despite his mild, incoherent demeanor during the trial, prosecutors revealed him as a man driven by a desperate need for control and validation from others. According to his analysis, Jaewon was exhibiting narcissistic tendencies and a profound desire for recognition from others. When events spiraled out of his control, be it the failing academic career or his crumbling relationship, he resorted to violence to reassert his dominance, a typical abuser. It's likely he wanted to be a famous doctor, not because he wanted to be seen as a caring doctor who truly cared about his patients' quality of life, but because he wanted the attention and the control. As a doctor, his patients would be at his mercy. This combination of traits made him dangerous. The prosecutors argued that his way of seeing himself as a victim, where he viewed himself as a victim of his own anger rather than its owner, could lead to future violence if he faced a similar situation. For Jaewon, incarceration would be a trigger for another outburst, and that's why they believed the death penalty was the only solution. In the courtroom, Jaewon broke into tears. He said, "I was consumed by darkness at the time and I did something I never should have." But no one had any sympathy for him. With his final hearing on November 8th, the sentencing has yet to be announced, but it's likely he will receive a life sentence, as judges very rarely give out death penalties. Worse criminals have evaded the death penalty. While we don't have a decision on his sentencing yet, this is the conclusion to the case. This case has also sparked a lot of discussion around manipulation, coercion, and abuse within relationships. Dating violence often goes underreported, and in South Korea, the Korean National Police's data shows that there were more than 19,000 cases of dating violence reported in 2023. And that's only the incidences that were reported. Many more go unreported because of the shame, stigma, and fear of retaliation that victims experience. This includes non-women victims of violence who are often not taken seriously by law enforcement. Even women aren't often taken serious by law enforcement. Dating violence can include physical violence, stalking, controlling behavior, and emotional abuse. It can escalate very quickly, such as in this case. If you suspect you or someone you know is a victim of dating violence, there are resources available to help you. I am not a medical professional, so I cannot give advice, but the first step in seeking support could be a family member, friend, or reaching out to a professional. Remember, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it likely is. Dating violence is not a private issue. It's a problem that affects all of us. As always, thank you for listening. Join us on Discord for free movie nights. Find my sources on Patreon. Quarterly Sticker Club is on Patreon as well. Follow the show wherever you listen. It truly helps me a lot. And last but not least, thank you to my patrons: Vixmac, Lala, William White, G1 Edwards, Nico, Elijah Hancock, Anomanom, Dr. Bob, Lumos, Emma Brown, David DeFoya, Adriana, Pip, Dade512, Lisa, Veronica, Olive, Caitlin, Sharon Evans, Nicey, Breaker O'Day, Kitten Who, and Ostabach. Daome topayo. See you next time.